What if you receive an opportunity to present to the senior management of the company that you work for a topic called about yourself and the projects that you have done? How can we make use of this opportunity to present in a way that the management will remember us and we can make an impactful presentation? Let me show you in this video an opportunity that I got recently and how I used storytelling and an invisible script to make the best use of this opportunity. Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Andrew Toh and I work as an analyst here in the bank in Singapore. So recently, I got an opportunity to present about myself to the senior management of the function that I work for. And the idea is that the management have a 1.5 hour monthly regular call, and there is an opportunity to carve out 10 minutes of that to invite junior talents around the office to present about themselves so that management can know who they are. And it's also a great opportunity for junior talents to raise their exposure and gain visibility in the organization. So I was nominated for that, and I'm thankful that my line manager nominated me for that. And it was the first opportunity for me to present to such a large group of that seniority level. So it's definitely a very important presentation for me. I had 2 weeks to prepare. And my line manager first broke the news to me that he nominated me for it, and I got it after it was approved. So my line manager discussed with me what are the expectations and gave me some tips as well. He will be in the call as well, together with the audience of roughly 15 to 20 people. I don't know how many they were exactly, but they were all of a very senior level. So he gave me some tips to share about where I came from, what I studied in school, what are some of the key projects that I did last year, and as well as talking about my recent move to a new project within the business division that I'm in. And I thought that this is a great opportunity as well for me to try out storytelling, because I came across this concept before about telling stories to make engagement, to make presentations more interesting. And I thought that I'm actually already going to be very comfortable to just give the standard 10-minute presentation about who am I, what did I do before, and these are the projects that I've done before, and go into some details about some of them, and then just wrap up with a conclusion slide. But I just wanted to get to insert a little more excitement and entertainment even to some extent, because I just wanted to make it a little more interesting. And I was interested to see how I can use storytelling to tell business cases and a little bit about myself as well. So the storytelling tool that I used is called the Hero's Journey. I came across this framework while I was watching Ali Abdaal's YouTube channel, and he talked about this story framework of how you can frame your videos in such a way that you can tell a compelling story. And I referred to a website, and I basically Googled the term Hero's Journey, and I found the top search result website, which basically talks about how leading movies that we've seen, that we know, like The Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, actually use something like this. So the hero's journey is basically made up of 12 parts in a story, and the usual story that we normally think of is like an introduction. We talk about the character going into a problem and how he solved that problem, and finally a conclusion. But the hero's journey is a more elaborate fashion. So what I did is to modify it a little bit so that it can fit the story that I wanted to tell. And I divided my presentation into 2 parts. The first part is to talk about where I came from, how I got into the bank that I work for, and the second half is to talk about the projects that I worked on and what I'm looking forward to. So the hero's journey begins with the ordinary world, framing the character in his comfort zone of what he's currently doing. You know, as we can imagine, any kind of Disney or Pixar movie, it usually begins with looking at a character in his comfortable land, in a once upon a time place, and he's just doing his own thing, and then suddenly he received a call to adventure, right? Somebody says that, hey, there's this thing that you might want to check out. But then, to make things more interesting, the main character first refused to go to answer the call of the adventure. So I tried to frame this and fit this around the story of how I got into the bank that I work for. It kind of makes it interesting that first the character refuses to get into the adventure until something happens along the way. Then he decided to go into that. So it's kind of like an elaborate introduction. And I thought back about how I got into the organization, and the way I try to frame this is that back in 2018, I was lucky enough to have 2 compelling offers to think of as a graduate job. The first offer that came from was from the current institution that I was doing an internship while waiting to graduate, and I continued to work there even after I graduated because I was basically planning a graduate trip. And the plan is that after I come back from my graduate trip in February 2019, then I would start on a full-time role. So interestingly, during that period of time, I went for many interviews and all that, and I received 2 final offers. One offer came from the technology provider that I worked for, which is basically a really cool job because I get to work in Google Singapore headquarters. I really thoroughly enjoyed my time there because, as some of you might know, I am a huge foodie and I love free food, and I will just smash my face with lots of food every single day and power my place was full of food, and I really enjoyed working there. But I'm not exactly a Google employee. Rather, I am a contractor because Google basically contracted the company that I was interning in to help build up the new offices that Google is expanding in the region. And my role in that project team is basically to work through the spreadsheets to make sure that all the numbers are correct. So that was a really fun project. And back then I wished that I could come back after I graduated. So I spoke to the project manager and he said that, yeah, sure, cool. I mean, after you graduate and after you come back from your graduate trip, we can talk about a project coordinator role for you to come back full-time onto this project. And interestingly, during that time, I also went for multiple interviews because obviously I was trying to keep my options open and to compare what are the other offers out there. And one of the roles I went for interview for, and I got into the final stages of getting an offer, is with the bank that I work for currently. So I'm framing in such a way that I had two offers in one hand, and I initially favored going to stay in the Google project, and kind of like don't really want the offer that I work for in the bank because obviously I love working in Google, right? I love all the food and I love the project. But then there was a turning point, which I'll later tell the story, that I decided to join the bank instead. So then the next act of the hero's journey comes where I meet a mentor, where I meet somebody or some event occurred that made me change my mind. And what really happened was that I spoke to the project manager of that Google project at that point in time for advice. I told him that, look, I really like to come back to this project, but I also received an offer from this global bank that I went for interviews, and they offered me a role, and I thought that these two are very difficult choices to make because while I love this project that I'm in, at the same time a global bank is actually an environment that I also want to explore because it's an international working environment, and I hopefully had the opportunity to travel one day, and that was in 2019, by the way. So the project manager then gave me some real good advice. It turns out that he actually worked in that bank before as a project manager, as an IT project manager at a senior level. So he said that you probably find greater opportunities compared to this project, even though yes, it's a great project, but it's still operating in a medium enterprise. So I thought about it for a second, and it turns out that he was right. So I went on to sign with the bank. I eventually worked on many great projects, and that was where I segued naturally into to talk about some of the projects that I did in the past 2 years. And those projects were challenging. And so in the second half of my presentation, I talk about literally me going through the ordeals, which is the next act of a hero's journey, going through the ordeals and going through the challenges and meeting allies, friends, foes, enemies along the way. And I could bring that in terms of allies such as the other departments that I worked with to solve the problem together, because it's always a team effort, right, to solve a complex problem. And then finally reaching like the innermost cave. The innermost cave of the hero's journey is where the main character encounters probably the most difficult part of that challenge. So I talked about the most difficult problem that I solved in that project. Finally, after overcoming that most difficult ordeal, then I talked about something a little more lighthearted. I talked about at the end of my first working year, I took the opportunity to travel overseas to Switzerland to see my Swiss colleagues that I normally call over the phone and talk to, right? Because I thought that, hey, since I'm talking to them over the phone for so many times, why don't I just meet them for the first time face to face, right? So that was back in 2019, pre-COVID. So obviously in hindsight, it's probably the best decision that I made in 2019, because if not for that chance, I probably don't know when would be able to another chance to go and see them, whether for personal or on a business reasons. So that was actually also at the same time my first solo trip that I took myself. I've been to Switzerland before a couple of times, and it's a pretty safe country, although it's kind of expensive to travel around, but I was confident to go there by myself, and I spent 2 weeks there. It was during the Christmas period in December 2019. I met a lot of friends along the way, co-workers, and I talked to them in person. We went to Christmas markets. We had a whale of a time. I thoroughly enjoyed meeting them face to face, and we did talk about some ways that we can work better together as well. And I was also happy to represent the fact that I'm collaborative, and I'm happy to meet you guys. And my co-workers were very friendly. They treated me as a guest in their country, and I really absolutely loved my time there. So that was the philosophy that convinced me that this was the right move. And in 2020, it was a challenging year. We had to definitely had to work remotely. Those physical bonding times that we had definitely helped us to tide through some of the difficult conversations that we had in 2020. So finally, the hero's journey concludes with the return of the elixir, which is basically some magical potion that the hero finds that gives everyone the cure that they need. But for me, in my case, I decided to talk about the new project I decided to embark on, and I sought to talk about a continuation, a new call for adventure that I was looking for. So that was how I crafted my story into a storytelling mode, and I thought that it was really fun doing it at the same time. And the way I presented it was that I had just a couple of slides as a visual cues, and some slides I had just very few words to mention the name of the projects that I was involved in, and those gave me the visual cues to talk about my project. So if you want to get started using the storytelling framework, the hero's journey in telling your own story, you can check out the website that I can link in the description below, and you can just start by writing down how each act of the 12 acts of the hero's journey. Basically, you could write down some simple answers to every one of the 12 of the acts, and then those answers can basically form the script. So the second challenge of presenting this topic is, how am I supposed to do so in a natural way? Because storytelling is interesting by itself, but it can get boring if it sounds like I was reading from the script, and I don't want to sound like I was reading from the script, right? Word for word, it's going to sound really boring. And that was a tip that my manager gave me as well, that yes, the management like to hear you, they like to hear continuation, they like to hear you talk about things, but try to keep it lively and natural at the same time. So it's challenging to do that because, you know, in front of the management, there's a tendency to be very careful with what we say. We don't want to say the wrong thing, right? We don't want to mess up. We don't want to blank out and don't know what to say, right? So there's a tendency, and I can totally understand that, to just script up everything word for word and just read out everything off the screen. But that was not the impression that I wanted to give. So I took on the challenge by coming up with something that I call an invisible script. An invisible script is basically scripting the entire thing that I wanted to say, the entire presentation, word for word. And then what I did was that I rehearsed through by myself. I talked to myself, and I had the script right in front of me, right? That was actually everything done in private. Days before the actual presentation, I was talking to myself and I was rehearsing it through, and I did it like 3 to 4 times. And then after that, I took away that script and I started to present to myself what I wanted to say, and timing myself at the same time, right? Because obviously I only had 10 minutes, I cannot go over time. And then on the actual day itself, I did not use the script. I forced myself not to look at the script at all, and just to only look at the visual cues. The mentality that I wanted to get is that it's kind of equivalent to, like, on the day itself, I needed to present something, and like, oh, I left my script at home, or I forgot to bring my script, right? What am I supposed to do? The show must still go on, right? So that was the kind of mentality that I tried to put myself in. It is definitely uncomfortable, but I know that without the script, I can present in a more natural way. And the reason why I can do so confidently is that because I had practiced several times already, the main points kind of comes to mind every time I see the visual cue, or every time I mention just the main point, and the other points will come to me just like a muscle memory. And that came about because of practice. So during the presentation, I was able to deliver it almost as if I had a script in front of me, but I obviously don't, and that's why I call it the invisible script, because I cannot see the script, but I kind of already have the main points at the back of my mind already, and I am able to deliver it almost in a muscle memory fashion because I've done it a few times already and I've rehearsed a few times. I think the goal is to aim for roughly 4 to 5 times of rehearsals. The first few times are definitely going to be bad, right? We'll trip over, we'll forget to say, oh, I forgot this, I forgot that point, but it got better over time and I was able to remember most of the points. So that was how I presented myself for this topic, and overall I felt that I did present in a natural way. So even though there was actually a last minute change in the type of content that I had to present because I had to cut up some stuff due to time limit constraints, I was actually able to adapt very flexibly because I already had the muscle memory in mind of the main points that I wanted to say. So when it came to the point that I thought that this was actually what I rehearsed, I was able to hold back those points and to just skip ahead towards the next point. So I hope that these two techniques help you to make your next presentation more interesting and more engaging using storytelling as a technique. And if you have any tips on how we can make a storytelling more impactful, please let me know in the comments below, and I look forward to see you in my next video.